the name of God, who encourages people to work together and to live together. The east coast of the White Sea extends from the Euphrates to the Nile, 1,000 kilometers of coastlines from the North River to the South River on the east of the White Sea. Syria is the biggest country on the east coast of the White Sea. The southern shoreline of the east coast of the White Sea is parallel with the Dead Sea fault line and a mountain chain that extends for 500 kilometers. The geography of the White Sea with the geography of the Dead Sea fault line and the mountain chain have influenced the demarcation of the borders for the countries of Lebanon, Israel, Gaza Strip, and Jordan. Syria has 22 million people. In the neighbor country of Syria, half of them are larger, half of them are smaller. Egypt is the largest, having 110 million people in the country. Iran has 90 million people. Turkey has 85 million people. The following countries are half the size of any of the largest, however, they are larger than Syria. Iraq has 45 million people. Saudi Arabia has 35 million people. Several other countries are situated along the east of the White Sea near Syria. Each of them are half of the size of Syria, or as small as a fraction of the size. Jordan has 11 million people. Greece has 10 million people. Israel has 9 million people. Lebanon has 6 million people. Gaza Strip has 2 million people. And Cyprus has 1 million people. Nearly 500 million people live in this area between the Euphrates and the Nile River, and to either side of it. You will find that half of all of these people are living together in the biggest cities of the countries. In Syria, 25% live in the 4 cities of Damascus, Aleppo, Homs, and Idlib. Today, half of the population of Syria has been displaced from the borders of the country. The population who remains inside the borders of Syria is a majority of men, and they are men whose fathers' fathers were born on this land. They are the men with the deepest bloodlines and the last remaining people of the country of Syria today. In the past, 2 million lived in Damascus, 2 million lived in Aleppo, 1 million lived in Homs, and 1 million lived in Idlib. Today, the population has refocused to different cities. Today, 3 million have focused into Idlib. Idlib is now the biggest city in Syria. Damascus has become 500,000 people. Homs has become smaller in population, and Aleppo had grown in size. When the siege on the border of Syria is lifted, neighbor countries would be very fast to economically bond with Syria because of the proximity and the geographic interdependence. Egypt has 25% of the country living in the metropolis of Cairo and Alexandria. Egypt is the biggest country on the east of the White Sea. Iran has 35% of the population living in the metropolis of Tehran. Turkey is the next biggest. 30% of Turkey lives in the metropolis of Istanbul. Half of the country of Turkey lives in the 4 biggest cities. Ankara has 5.5 million people. Gaziantep has 2 million. Antalya has 1 million. Hatay is significant to Syria. It blocks the territory from access to the shore of the White Sea. Economically, Hatay province would be inseparable from Syria. Only imaginary borders and politics could try and separate them. 1.5 million people live in Hatay province. And as you will see, with the biggest powers of the economy of all of these countries being wielded by a handful of cities along the east coast of the White Sea. The biggest city in the country becomes the economic engine and supplies the power for the country to have international trade. Iraq has nearly 30% of the population living in the cities of Baghdad, Basra, Fallujah, and Karbala. Baghdad has 8 million. Basra has 1 million. Fallujah has 500,000, and Karbala has 500,000. Saudi Arabia has 40% of the population living in 4 biggest cities. Jeddah has 5 million. Riyadh has 4 million. Mecca and Medina have 500,000 people living there each. Jordan has more than half of the population living in 3 big cities. Amman has 4 million. Irbid has 2 million. Zarqa has 1.5 million people living there. Greece has nearly 40% of the people living in the metropolis of Athens alone. Athens is equal to nearly half of the economic power of the country of Greece. Israel has 20% of the population living in 3 cities, Jerusalem, Tel Aviv, and Haifa. Lebanon has 60% of the population living in 3 cities. Beirut has half of the population of Lebanon living there. They are 3 million people in the city of Beirut. Tripoli and the metropolis of Sidon have each 250,000 people, and Cyprus has 30% of the population living in one city named Nicosia. Your loving daughter, Catherine Alwan, written February 27th of 2024. So this is the territory from the Euphrates to the Nile, this area here, and we included the population of this country, this country, this country, and this country. So now we have this, and this is 500 million people of the world living here, and that half of the people who live here, that is 250 million people, are going to be focused into the 3 biggest cities of that country, and that every country is made up of 3 cities who are the economic engine and supply the international force of power. And therefore you can say that any country that we are interacting with is not a country, but rather the engine of 3 cities. And then you will know who you are facing. You are facing the head cities of these territories. When you face Egypt, you face Cairo and Alexandria, and this is our negotiating partners, not any leader. And the leaders are maintaining control over this city by controlling, by having an economic leverage using the contracts for gas and for other minerals and raw resources, especially iron ore, which is required for every machine and every piece of economic infrastructure, that they would use those raw materials and natural resources have billions of dollars of leveraging power that has been disconnected and dissociated from the economic engine of the country. So the gas is somewhere else, and these people are Egypt. Cairo, the people of Cairo are Egypt, and that should be our new circumstance of negotiation and approaching the situation. This is the east coast of the White Sea, and as we know, there is a active military situations happening here. There is 9 million people living here, 6 million people living here, and 2 million people living right here. And that 25% of this country's economic power is focused into 3 cities, whereas half of this country's economic power has been focused into 1 city here in Beirut. So Lebanon has an incredible economic engine in the city of Beirut, which is equal to half of the economic power of Lebanon. Lebanon being 6 million is very comparable to the size of Israel, which is 9 million. So it's quite comparable in size, with a greater focalization of power and a direct highway called the M1 to Damascus, which is another centralizing power. Damascus gets all of their power out of Palmyra. Palmyra is the crown diamond of the country of Syria. It has the oil and it has the phosphate mines, and that economic power is leveraged through the cities here. The powers are focalized into these cities here, and that gets access across into the, I'm sorry, that it wasn't the M1. The M1 is here from Homs into Tartus, and rather there's another highway here from Damascus directly into Beirut. It's a 2-hour drive, very fast, and that the military activity here is being projected out of these two cities, Jerusalem and Tel Aviv, which only have 500,000 people there. It's very small and not focalized in power, and that this million people have focalized their military aggression onto this small area, which is 2 million. 25% of them lived in this city here, which is being completely bombarded with the intention to make it uninhabitable. And the reason for that is that the intention is to increase the territory and economic power of these two cities into the Sinai Peninsula. So they want to increase the power into the Sinai Peninsula. And the reason for that is that there is a natural and old and dry waterway here. This is a dried waterway, and it goes through these highlands directly over to and can get you into the Gulf of Aqaba. And this is a very significant economic access point, because it would allow a second pathway to travel from all of this side of the world would want to access this way, would now be able to access another pathway here. So that would allow a new centralization of power here on the east of the Mediterranean. It would allow this to very much focalize in power here in this green, emerald green zone, and that it would create a second rivaling pathway, and it would allow all of this area also to thrive economically, because suddenly you would have a second economic channel. So that is the intention. The intention is to build the Ben Gurion Canal in the namesake place of the Ben Gurion, which is here. So there's going to be a waterway coming out of this area here, and the only natural way is to follow a old riverbed. And so this is essential to that trying to focalize power in Jerusalem and Tel Aviv. It would be essential for them to economically compete with Cairo, or to either have a peace with Cairo, which they seem to not be able to do. So it seems that the lack of peace between Cairo and Jerusalem is the instigating factor for all of this hellscape here, and the inability to allow this area to economically populate, or to thrive economically and populate, and instead to turn it into a zone of competition. And that is absolutely based on the trade, which is a monopolistic trade of raw resources, which generates billions of dollars more than any city base could hope from their the normal economic interchanges. These are just unnatural condensations of power. Then, and as we discussed, the country here, Turkey, is this country has focused half of their population here at Istanbul, at Ankara, and at Antalya. So here is all of Turkey right here in 1, 2, 3, and then there's some more right there. This is just an incredible focalization of the people, of the economic power and the life of the people. Here is all of Iran. Here's all of Iran, and 25% of them are exactly here in Tehran, in the metropolis of Tehran. That's 25% of the whole country is there. It's an incredible focalization of power. This is all of Saudi Arabia, and this is all of Saudi Arabia, and we know that 10 million people are here in Jeddah and Riyadh, and that is nearly 20% of the country in 2 cities, and that's their economic power. As we know that they've also focalized the exploitation of the country's natural resources along that belt, and that there's a huge transportation chain to move gas, especially out of the Arabian Sea, and to transport it to Europe, knowing that gas is more abundantly exploitable out of any ocean, and that you could get it out of any of these oceans. Anywhere you see an earthquake, you know that they're drilling gas there. That's how you'll find the oil platforms, and that it's not favorable to drill for gas upon land, and you need a lot of water in the process, and it's much more economic to get your gas from the ocean basin, which they are doing here, and they've developed major contracts all along this area here. So now all from Syria across to Egypt, and that Egypt has started a tremendous number of offshore gas operations, and that the new horizons of gas exploitation is offshore, and that they have these big machine systems made to as permanent, semi-permanent infrastructure for that trade. That Cyprus is 1 million people and has very little capacity to focalize any kind of power. That Lebanon has become tremendous in size, and that the geography has shielded and focused and concentrated the powers here. That the water supplies in the mountains, it's clear the mountains are green. The aquifers under the mountains are allowing the life to thrive here. That these areas remain unpopulated, and that deserts are barriers. Deserts stop trade. The last, Syria, they have focalized the population was 2 million in Damascus, 2 million in Aleppo, and 1 million in Idlib. And it's now become 500,000 in Damascus and 3 million in Idlib, with probably over 1 million in Aleppo, and only maybe 250,000 in Homs. There's been a tremendous movement of the population, as well as 22 million people, is half, 10 million of them have been shifted entirely outside of the country. So this is a tremendous dislocation of the economic powers. Allahu Akbar.